So we already know that the brain develops like a flower, from the bottom up, from the back forward, from the inside out, from right to left. And we know that we have to ask and answer the two big questions, which is there anything that's distorting the information that the brain is receiving from the body and from the environment, and therefore changing a child's ability to adapt to stress? And question two is, what tools are they using to be able to engage with and understand the world? Now, we know that as the brain develops like a flower, we develop more complex tools from a baby to adulthood. When we are initially born, the primary seat and the primary way that we engage with our world is something called primitive reflexes or infantile movement reflexes, depending on who you ask. This is something like a rooting reflex when you swipe a baby's face and they look for a nipple, a spinal galant reflex where they do that, or if you've ever seen them do this pose, that's an asymmetric tonic neck reflex, Moro, which is the startle reflex. All those different things are all built in and critical to survival for a baby. When those are no longer needed, our complexity of our world increases, and therefore the tools that we have should increase to meet that demand. From infantile movement reflexes, what we move into is primary seat of movement and touch. And this is going to be gross and fine motor control, okay? Large muscle groups and then fine muscle groups. After we move into gross and fine motor, primary seat becomes auditory and verbal. Child at this stage is going to be a couple years old. They're going to start to talk a lot more, going to be really more expressive. They can't shut up. They have expressive, receptive language, and these are starting to develop. And then our most complex way that we can interact with our world is through vision, and then the visualization and cognition that goes around with that. I think the easiest way to understand vision and cognition is that if you and a child entered the room, in order to really be able to understand all the components of that room, that child would need to go run up and touch every little thing. If I were to ask you what this whiteboard felt like, you probably could think of it right now without needing to touch it, just because your brain can visualize based off your past experiences. And that's the highest seat that we have when it comes to development. Now, whenever we see altered behaviors, challenges, deficits, whether it's a child who can't sit still in classroom, or a child who's struggling with language, or a child who's studying with reading, or all of the different things that come in between, what we always want to look at these behaviors as isn't as a deficit, isn't as a challenge, necessarily is as a problem, which they are, but what I view these more as is a window to how a brain is functioning. A child that can't sit still, sure, we can look and try to strap them to a desk and give them different things that they can do to be able to channel their energy, but at the end of the day, what comes down to it is they're probably sitting in a school which has high demands for auditory, verbal, and visual and cognition, and their body still probably had a stressor that keeps them stuck down here where their primary seat is movement and touch. Now again, obviously we don't want to completely ignore that, and having other strategies is the case, but looking at the proper order and bringing in components to actually allow the body to make development in order is absolutely crucial. So question one again is there something that is distorting the information the brain is receiving from the body? As a neurologically based chiropractor, the most important thing there I look for is subluxation, which is a misalignment of the spine that by definition alters the input that's going up to the brain. Most common place for that to actually happen is during the birthing process, so it makes sense for this whole trajectory. From there, what we start to look at is, are reflexes active? Do they need to be integrated? Are there specific exercises in order that we need to do? Do we need to work on gross motor control, fine motor control, auditory control, verbal? Do we have to work on verbal? Do we have to have different exercises and games to work to make these brain pathways? Now, the order is very important. Typically, when we look at these deficits, we just throw in and say, okay, well, we have challenges with reading, so let's go drill letters, and that's good. But we need to be making sure that we address the other lower levels of the components as well, so we can properly ascend. Because at the end of the day, a child who's stuck here, they will have challenges in these two areas, right? And any time that we include a stress here, a child who's stuck here, who has increased demand here, like sitting in a school, listening to a teacher, being able to look at a blackboard, that's going to overload their nervous system in a way that it wouldn't necessarily overload you or I. So when we look and make changes here, we have to be cognizant of any sort of thing that we do there is going to be really overloading the nervous system. And the order, asking and answering the big two questions, is extremely important. Okay? So I hope that makes a lot of sense as to more information for how the brain does develop like a flower and how we can work with understanding each of our children, not viewing behaviors as a problem, not just viewing them as a challenge, but it's just simply a window into how the brain is functioning. Because we understand how a child is functioning, we can make clear and specific decisions for how we're going to address that to allow them not to just be able to fit better into our society. Sure, that could be a goal, but to allow them to blossom into the human being that they are meant to be.